Hello everybody, Deathblade here with another Yin Yang China. I'm still working on this warm Qingdao beer that I opened in the last video that I recorded. If you haven't checked out that video, you can click on the link and find out about drinking beer lukewarm in China. And again, I'm not sponsored by Qingdao, but if there are any representatives of Qingdao in the audience, please feel free to contact me at any point. Today what I'm going to be talking about is something that I think every foreigner that I've ever run into has encountered, and I think everybody finds irritating, and that is the fact that people you don't know and have never seen before, complete and utter strangers that you have just met. It could even be just a random person in the elevator. It could be a taxi driver. It could be somebody that's in line at the grocery store that's, has the guts to start up a conversation with you. They will ask you a lot of personal questions, and today I'm specifically going to be focusing on the income question. So it's really common for Chinese people to just directly ask you, so how much do you make? And at least where I come from in the United States, it's not really that common to be going around asking people how much they make. I feel like even among relatively close friends, I don't think it's necessarily that common to constantly be talking about your salaries, maybe in some circles, but at least not in the circle that I come from, and most foreigners that I've met also find it a little bit irritating to have people that you don't even know asking you about your salary. And so you can't avoid it. I've asked Chinese people about it, and I feel that although it's not necessarily considered impolite, it's not like polite to do it, but it's the kind of thing where even Chinese people will ask each other. And the thing is, a lot of Chinese people are very proud of their salary, and they want to sort of brag about how high it is. A lot of people are like that. Those people that don't have a high salary, trust me, they wish they did, and then if they did, they would brag about it. And so therefore, I think in some senses they assume that foreigners all have really high salaries. That's kind of one of the sort of perceptions that a lot of the average Chinese people have, is that foreigners are all rich and the foreigners come to China and make a whole bunch of money, which is not necessarily true. Starting salaries for English teachers that don't have a lot of experience can be anything from 5 to maybe 10,000 yuan per month. So that's less than 1,000 to not even 2,000 per month. Of course, the cost of living is a lot lower here, and you get a lot of perks. But the point is that starting level English teachers are definitely not making a lot of money. Now, if you're being brought to China by a company and you're like an engineer or like a scientist or something like that, that's probably a different story. But the vast majority of expats that you meet floating around China, a lot of them are teachers, and although some of them can eventually end up making kind of a lot of money, it's not really that common. So the point is, going back to what I said a moment ago, is that I think that a lot of Chinese people assume that you're making a lot of money and assume that you kind of want to brag about it, and so therefore they don't really hesitate to ask you. Another prevailing thought that I've got this opinion from a few different Chinese people is that they think that because we are foreigners, we're different, and so we don't really necessarily need to be held to the same standard of politeness as Chinese people. So I think probably the average Chinese person, if they run into another Chinese person in the elevator and they're chatting, is not just going to be like, hey, how much money do you make, just right off the bat, but they will with us. So so that's the downside. What is the upside to this trend? Well, I mean, you might have noticed a theme kind of building up in these videos already, where basically the upside of a lot of these things is just the fact that you have to get used to it. But I think beyond that, if you take the time to think about how to respond to the questions, it can give you a really good way to turn the conversation into something more interesting for yourself. So over the years, I came up with a few different tactics to respond to those kind of questions. One of the tactics that I used is I would say, I would just give a blanket number. I wouldn't specifically talk about my own salary. I would just say, teachers, because at the time I was a teacher, teachers tended to make between 5 and 10,000 yuan per month or something like that. And they would almost always accept that answer. I went through a period of time where I was kind of irritated about the whole thing and just would refuse to talk about it. I would be like, that's not polite to ask me. I don't want to talk about it. But then eventually what I found was that you can kind of deflect the question and then switch it around and say, well, before I tell you how much I make, how about you tell me how much you make? And then you can start getting more information about that person, that job they do, and how much they make. And actually most of them they aren't really fazed when you ask them that question. They'll just start talking about it. And it was by doing that I started to learn, number one, how much cab drivers in my city make, which was actually roughly the same as the English teachers, believe it or not. A lot of them made something like 5 or 6, it seemed like the lowest sort of standard, and then some of them that worked really hard would make something around like 8, 9, 10,000 renminbi per month. And again, depending on the exchange rates and stuff, that's something like a little bit over 1,000, you know, maybe 1,200, maybe $1,500 dollars per month. And then now what can happen from that point is, because you've deflected the conversation and changed it to that person, then maybe the conversation just keeps on going and then you don't ever have to end up talking about your own salary. But at a certain point, if you kind of reach the end of that conversation, you might need to come back around and talk about what your salary is, and then you can jump to the tactic I used a moment ago, which is to talk about a range. And just if you're not comfortable talking about your own salary, then you can just talk about a range and say, oh well, most English teachers make like this much money or whatever. So again, I've reached the end of another video. I have not yet finished my catchphrase. I've gotten a lot of suggestions and I'm contemplating them. I'll try to come up with something in the next couple videos. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next video.